The ship's mast groans under the weight of the open sails. A light wind moves the boat towards new horizons, new hope, and the new world. When Columbus discovered America, the world changed forever. At the end of the 15th century, European colonization of unknown inviting land, storing precious treasures, unexplored secrets, and great danger began. Some of you know how difficult it is to build a camp for several people on an expedition. You spend a lot of time setting up tents, making bonfires, gathering firewood, and cooking. Now imagine how difficult it is to create a large colony and build a city. And what about the country? You have no connection to the continent, the internet, or modern technology. You obtain food supplies and building materials on the island through hard work or wait for several months until a large ship reaches you. And there's no guarantee that it will come. It can get caught in a storm, go off course, or disappear mysteriously. Europeans were living in such conditions for centuries when they were colonizing the New World and building the United States of America. In addition to the obvious risks and dangers, they faced something sinister and unknown. For example, there were cases when entire colonies disappeared without a trace, and no one knew what happened to them. Perhaps they awakened something evil and inexplicable, or got lost in the forests of early America, or something much worse. One such case occurred with the Roanoke Colony at the end of the 16th century. So far, none of the scientists and researchers have solved the mystery of the tragic disappearance of about 100 people. In 1587, a group of settlers consisting of 115 people, with John White as their leader, was rapidly approaching the shores of America on a large cargo ship. John stared forward confidently. He was determined to establish a new territory for his country and build a house for his family. Besides experienced sailors, travelers, and builders on board the ship, there was John White's wife and his daughter with her husband. They all sailed to an island called Roanoke. This piece of land was a fort and, in the future, would be the beginning of modern North Carolina. However, John White didn't know yet at what price it would be done. The group leader was confident in his abilities because this was not the first attempt to establish a colony there. The first two times the British tried to build a fort post on the island ended with a series of failures. A lack of food supplies and other problems prevented colonization. But not everything was so bad. The previous settlers learned that there were precious metals somewhere on the island, and anyone who found them would become wealthy. Everything was supposed to work out this time. John White was sure of it and was prepared for the new attempt. So at last, the ship docked to the shore. The whole crew got to the ground. Everyone was excited about new opportunities on the new land, so they quickly started building a new home. John White supervised the construction, explored the island, and established contacts with the natives. The settlers spent every day working hard, building houses, making fires, and cooking food. And despite the difficult conditions, the team settled in, and John White's daughter gave birth to a daughter. However, soon, the standards of living began to deteriorate. Cold weather was approaching, and the supplies of food and building materials were quickly running out. Remembering the experience of the previous settlers, John White decided not to bring the situation to a critical point, so he went to England to get provisions in advance. He calculated that he could return before people ran out of supplies, so he left his wife, daughter, and granddaughter in Roanoke. He set off on a months-long journey back to England with a small team. Always keeping in mind that his family was waiting for him on the island, he came to the residence of Queen Elizabeth I immediately upon arrival to ask for a new cargo of food. However, while he was sailing to England, some events happened that interfered with his plans. His country came into conflict with Spain. The Queen ordered the return of all ships sailing for the New World. She decided to gather a fleet to fight the opponent. The shipment of provisions to the island where John White's family lived was cancelled. It's not known how the group leader reacted to these events, but he probably went crazy because of his inability to fix anything. Using all his connections and influence, John White managed to get a ship with provisions. However, it happened only 3 years after his return to England. He understood that the settler supplies had most likely run out by this time. and he had no idea what had happened to his family. With a new team, he quickly set off for the New World. A few months later, he saw the familiar outlines of the shore. The closer the ship got to the land, the more John White's excitement grew. He looked through a spyglass, but saw no signs of life on the island. When he came ashore, he immediately ran towards the settlement. He found houses they had built together destroyed. All trunks were looted. There was an ominous silence, and no people. The colony seemed to have disappeared. John White realized something bad had happened to his people and his family. Perhaps they went somewhere in search of food supplies, or maybe someone or something made them run away. England started several investigations to find out what had happened, but didn't get any answers. The only clue John White found was the word Croatoan scratched into a wooden post. For centuries, historians have been trying to unravel the disappearance of the colony. They put forward different versions. Some believed that the local tribes had attacked the colony, and others thought the settlers had gone inland in search of food and had just gotten lost. There was also a version that local tribes had put a curse on people and they had faced some phantom sinister force. However, the first version seemed the most realistic because Croatoan meant the name of the island where the tribes lived. Perhaps they waited until John White left the settlement and attacked the British. Of course, this version was also tested. People visited the island but found no traces of settlers there, and locals said they hadn't seen the disappeared colony. According to another version, the settlers tried to return to England after waiting for John White for some time. They were unsure whether the leader would come back, so they decided not to wait for the supplies to finish and went to England on the ships of other settlers sailing there. Who knows, maybe they got into a storm and disappeared at sea. Perhaps they met Spaniards with whom the British had a conflict. But all these are guesses that have no evidence. We would have never known what happened to the Roanoke Colony if, in 2012, Elizabethan-era researchers hadn't discovered the mark of an unknown fort drawn in invisible ink on John White's map. That place was only 50 miles from Roanoke. After discovering the new clue, archaeologists traveled to North Carolina to find the secret fort. They arrived at the place and found many fragments of English pottery lying on the ground. Among them, there were pots and jars for storing and cooking food. There was also a Native American village not far from this location. There's a version that the colony split up. One group went to the island of Croatoan to wait for John White. Before that, they scratched this word on a tree as a hint. The second group went deep into the country and settled in that secret place marked on the map. In the future, researchers may find definite answers to all these questions. But until that happens, the disappearance of the Roanoke Colony is still one of the most famous mysteries in American history.
Thick fog is rising over the ocean as the sun is slowly sinking towards the horizon. It's hard to see further away than a few dozen feet, but that's enough to notice a hulking, skeletal shape in the distance. As your ship approaches the figure, your heart beats faster, and then you make out the details of another vessel, abandoned by the looks of it. Ghost ships do exist, and their mysteries aren't always solved. Take MV Hoyita, for example. It was a wooden vessel built in 1931 as a luxury yacht. It had served well to various people over 20 years before it was bought by a Samoan sailor and became a merchant ship. In 1955, though, Hoyita's service came to an abrupt and mysterious end. On October 3rd, it set sail for another trading voyage that should have taken no more than 48 hours. Delays happen in the sea, so when Hoyita didn't arrive on October 5th as scheduled, there was little worry yet. But then it failed to come on the following day too. There was no distress signal or any other sign of Hoyita's presence anywhere between its departure and arrival points. A search and rescue party was dispatched to find the ship, and for 6 days, they were scouting the area of nearly 100,000 square miles. On October 12th, the mission returned to the base empty-handed. Hoyita vanished without a trace. It was only a month later that another merchant ship, Tuvalu, noticed the missing vessel far away from its route, drifting in the open sea and listing heavily. The sailors boarded the ship and found that all of its crew and passengers, 25 people total, were missing, along with all the cargo the vessel had been carrying. The radio was tuned to the International Distress Channel, meaning that the crew had been trying to ask for help, but they couldn't reach anyone because the radio cable had been damaged, limiting the range to 2 miles. The lifeboats were missing as well, indicating that people on board must have left the ship. Unfortunately, they seem to have taken the logbook with them, leaving the rescue team clueless as to what had happened. Even today, the mystery of MV Hoita hasn't been solved yet. No one knows where the crew and passengers had gone and what had caused them to leave. SV Carol A. Deering wasn't a ghost ship in the usual sense of the word. There are no sightings of it in the open sea. Instead, it was found on the shore, but the circumstances of it running aground are a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Carol A. Deering was built in 1919 in Maine, and it was a large vessel made for commercial voyages. Unfortunately, despite its large cost of construction, it had only served for a year before its last trip. July 19, 1920. The ship was traveling from Puerto Rico to Rio de Janeiro via Newport News to deliver a cargo of coal. It was almost halfway to the final destination when the captain felt seriously ill, and the crew turned back to drop him and his son off and replace the captain. The voyage went without incident, but when it came to Barbados in December to resupply, there were strange moods among the crew. The first mate didn't seem to be happy with the new captain. No one paid much attention to it back then, when they probably should have. The last sighting of Carol A. Deering at sea was on January 28, 1921, when a lightship noticed it off the coast of North Carolina. There was some commotion on the quarterdeck of the ship, where the crew were normally not allowed. Then, another vessel sighted it, but there was already no one on the decks. On January 31st, the merchant ship was found hard aground in the Diamond Shoals, a site notorious for numerous shipwrecks that had been occupying there for centuries. When the search and rescue party boarded the ship, they found it abandoned, the log and personal belongings of the crew gone, along with the 2 lifeboats. There is still no answer to what happened on board of Carol A. Deering that January, although the most popular version was mutiny. Maybe we'll never find out the truth though. SS Bechimo is perhaps one of the most notable ghost ships in history. This large cargo steamer was built in 1914 in Sweden and plodded its way dutifully over 16 years, trading provisions for pelts with native tribes of Alaska and Canada. But then, on October 1st, 1931, Bechimo got caught in pack ice. At first, it seemed the crew would be able to wait it out and continue on their route because the ship broke free in a couple of days. But in less than a week, it became caught again, this time for good. In another week, a rescue party was sent to fetch 22 of the Bechimo's crew, while another 15 remained behind to wait through the winter if necessary and get the ship back. But a month later, after a powerful blizzard struck their camp, the sailors went out of their shelters only to find the ship gone. Luckily, a few days later, a native hunter told them Bechimo hadn't been lost yet. He'd seen it about 45 miles from where they had been stationed. They managed to track it down, but decided the ship wouldn't survive the winter. So they took the most valuable cargo from its hold and abandoned it. They were wrong though. SS Bechimo did survive that winter, and many more that followed. When the ice broke, it sailed away on its own, drifting listlessly along the shores of Canada and Alaska. There were numerous sightings of the ghost ship, sometimes adrift in the open sea, and at other times stuck in the pack ice again. People attempted to board and salvage it, but weather conditions or lack of equipment always prevented them. SS Bechimo was last sighted by native Alaskans in 1969, 38 years after its abandonment. What became of it later remains unknown. The story of SS Orang Medan is one of the most puzzling and harrowing ghost ship stories of the 20th century. No one even knows for sure if the ship even existed in the first place. It wasn't recorded in Lloyd's Shipping, the International Register of Ships, which makes it either a tall tale or a vessel that avoided being officially recognized for some shady reasons. In any case, the accounts as to what happened to the Medan vary. According to most reports, it was carrying some unknown cargo in the Indonesian waters when a distress call was received by another ship in the vicinity. The officer on duty heard an SOS message, but its contents are different depending on the accounts. The message did not repeat, and the crew of Medan didn't answer to any attempts to contact it back. The ship that received the distress call hurried to the rescue, but they only reached the vessel the following day, when it was already drifting and slightly listing. When the rescuers boarded the ship, they found that none of the crew had survived. However, one lifeboat was missing, which implied that there was at least one crew member who managed to escape. What happened to the rest of the people on board remains a mystery to this day. Still, there are no hard facts about this story, so we might never find out whether SS Orang Medan was actually a ship and not a thing of fiction. SV Zabrina was a 3-mast sailing barge built in 1873 for river trade ships in South America. She served for well over 4 decades, proving to be a sturdy and reliable ship. It was later transferred to Europe, where it continued serving its purpose well. But then, in October 1917, Zabrina set sail on a regular voyage only to be found ashore several days later. Mysteriously, although the ship was perfectly intact, the entire crew of 5 and the captain were gone. There is no direct evidence or hard facts as to what really happened that day. The most convincing theory is that the crew were washed away from the deck because of an underwater explosion. And then the ship sailed ahead without them, but the truth, as always, remains unknown.
You go for a hike in the steep mountains of Mammoth Lakes, California. The terrain is rugged and difficult. The icy snow makes it harder to walk. Halfway along the hike, you spot something out of the ordinary. From a distance, you spot scattered stuff lying on the rocky ground. You walk a little closer to have a clearer look and see what appears to be the remains of an airplane. It turns out that the debris belonged to record-breaking pilot Steve Fossett. Authorities had been looking for him for almost a year. No one could find him and explain what caused his plane to crash. It seemed like such an easy flight for an experienced pilot. So what could have happened to him? You see, years before this tragic event, Fossett was attempting a much riskier feat. He was trying to be the first pilot to fly around the world solo in a hot air balloon. Now, can you imagine spending 2 weeks in a tiny container just to break a world record? If you're wondering, here's what you'll need to fly around the globe: a sound navigation system, a wealthy sponsor, and tireless endurance. Even though balloons are the oldest flying vehicle, no one until Fossett managed to fly around the world with them, and it sure wasn't a breeze. It's day 1 of Fossett's second attempt to fly around the world in a balloon. The year is 1997, and an anxious crowd gathers in St. Louis, waiting for Fossett's takeoff. The pilot walks into the stadium with a big smile. He certainly doesn't look the part of an adventurer trying to achieve the impossible. But this is the trip of his life. To prepare, he trained to acclimatize himself to an altitude of 12,000 feet. The conditions are harsh. He's flying in an unpressurized cabin and in between the clouds. It seems unlikely he'll make it all the way, but there he goes. The balloon launches into the air. The crowd beneath is cheering and waving him goodbye. The wind of about 5 knots allows the balloon to launch. On the first night, one of his heaters breaks. It is freezing outside the cabin, but he gets through the night. Fossett's secret weapon is the world's first balloon autopilot. It gets lonely up there, and the constant need to focus makes one very soon tired. At night, he turns on the autopilot to get some sleep. It fires the burners in a computer-programmed sequence and keeps the balloon on the flight path. Fossett needs to wake up and operate the burners to change the altitude. After 3 days, a first victory. He has flown across the Atlantic Ocean. He flies solo, but a team accompanies him on the ground. They communicate mostly through email sent via satellite. At the end of the first week, the Mission Control Center receives an alarming email from Fossett. Dark clouds are mounting on the horizon. It looks like the weather is turning against him. He can see the thunderstorm from the balloon, but there is no way to predict how strong it is. Fossett is determined to fly through the clouds despite the risks. He is flying at 1,000 feet above the ground with no visibility. Somehow, he makes it through. His flight continues through Libya, Iran, and India. It looks like nothing will stop him now, but he is already exhausted. He is uncertain how much longer he can keep going. Inside the balloon, the meals are small rations, and he uses a bucket as a toilet. Unfortunately, he has lost a lot of fuel while crossing the Atlantic. Halfway through India, the balloon crashes into a tree. He flew an astounding 9,600 miles from St. Louis until his landing spot. Steve didn't achieve his goal, but he won't give up. To finally be successful, Fossett needs to change his strategy. His new plan is to fly over the southern hemisphere. It was the first time anyone would ever try that. His idea is simple. In the southern part of the globe, he would fly mostly over water. This would help him fly faster, as he would only need flight permission from 5 countries along the way. If you were on the ground as Fossett flew by, maybe you wondered what that flying object in the sky was. As he flew over Cape Town in South Africa, over 50 people reported seeing strange flying objects. Sorry to disappoint your fantasy folks, but it was just Steve Fossett and his balloon. His first attempt to fly around the world through the southern hemisphere almost worked out. He got lucky. When he reached Australia, he caught a jet stream that helped him speed up to about 115 knots. That's 3 times the speed of a gazelle. Morale was high as Fossett had already broken his distance record by flying over 13,500 miles. Under his feet, the beautiful Australian landscape is filled with deserts and dry lakes. He crossed the Australian coast at 8:22 p.m. local time, and his next expected landfall was in Chile, over 7,500 miles away. But again, a huge thunderstorm got in his way. After entering the storm, the balloon showed how fragile it was. The lightning and fierce winds tore the balloon apart. This time, he wouldn't make it through. He fell into the ocean as the balloon caught fire. A rescue team waited until morning to go look for Fossett. A Hercules aircraft rescued him from open waters. In his 6th attempt, Fossett made it around the world in a hot air balloon. The Spirit of Freedom balloon landed in Queensland, Australia, after a 2-week flight across the globe. He flew at speeds of over 200 miles per hour and journeyed over 19,263 miles. Fossett had done it. He was the first solo pilot to cross the world in a balloon. However, he didn't stop there. Soon after breaking this world record, he wanted to do the same on a different vehicle. He convinced Richard Branson, the owner of Virgin Atlantic, to fund a single jet-powered aircraft, later called the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer. On the 8th of February 2005, the Global Flyer took off. It set out to circumnavigate the Tropic of Cancer, an incredible length of around 23,000 miles. Out of luck, or sheer ingenuity, Fossett broke yet another world record. He overcame a major fuel loss early on in the flight and made it all the way back to Salina in Kansas, where he originally departed from. Did this story make you want to hop on a hot air balloon? Fossett was the expert in aerial adventures and extreme conditions. This is why his disappearance in the Sierra Nevada mountains was full of mystery. What could have happened to take down such an experienced pilot? On the 3rd of September 2007, Fossett took off from a Nevada ranch with a single-engine plane named Super Decathlon. It was a simple, leisurely day flight that took a dark turn. Fossett never made it back to the ranch. A search and rescue team was sent to find the pilot and his plane, but they returned empty-handed. It wasn't until a year later that a hiker found some of Fossett's belongings near Mammoth Lakes. Then an aerial search located the remains of Fossett's 2-seater at an elevation of 10,000 feet. The mystery was solved with the help of advanced technology. In the world's first hexagonal wind tunnel facility, experts recreated the weather conditions of the day of Fossett's flight. They were trying to understand if the downdrafts from the Sierra Nevada mountains could have brought his plane to the ground. With the help of a smaller plane replica, they made a disturbing discovery. That day, visibility was normal, but the wind currents swelled the plane like a leaf. A sudden downdraft most likely disoriented Fossett and made him lose control of the aircraft, causing him to crash directly into the mountains. The plane's engine wasn't powerful enough to overcome the wind forcing it into the ground. It turns out it was entirely out of Fossett's control. The discovery of the debris brought closure to this unfortunate